How do you support the government?
Well, we would say voluntary contributions would be...
Like donate what you feel the government is worth?
Probably.
How much would you donate?
And then this is awesome. Yeah, what I think it's worth.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today on the show, we discuss libertarianism. Libertarianism didn't really take off as a party in America until the early 1970s. It is now an officially recognized party in 35 states, including Alaska. Although seen as fringe by some, their most famous and wealthy adherents, Charles and David Koch, for example, have successfully infused libertarian ideals about the economy, the judiciary, and culture into American politics. The hallmark of that philosophy, less taxation and smaller government, dominate the Republican Party. Today we speak with Clift, who was the 2014 Libertarian gubernatorial candidate in Alaska, the 2018 candidate for lieutenant governor, and a 2020 candidate for Alaska Senate. Clift was the 2022 chair of the Alaska Libertarian Party Platform Committee, and we will spend the bulk of today discussing that platform.
Clift, welcome to the podcast.
Well, hi, I'm glad to be here, and I love to talk about my favorite topic, which is libertarianism.
Where did you grow up?
I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, and when I was about 12 or 13, we moved to Alabama, Huntsville, Alabama. My stepfather had a job in the aerospace industry, so we sold our business in Nashville and moved down there to Huntsville, Alabama. But retail merchants in Nashville is my background, and my mother continued to work in retail for a while after we moved to Huntsville. And my stepfather was like a job shopper with the aerospace industry. So,
and were they political people?
Not particularly, no.
And so, how'd you get out of Huntsville?
Oh, this is a great story, actually. I was pretty much allergic to the South. Let's put it that way. It was humid and it was hot. I had a lot of allergies. And they used to run this commercial on television. If you can't move to Arizona, take Dristan. And I said, well, why don't I just move to Arizona? So I went to the University of Arizona for my bachelor's degree.
Then what happened?
I met my husband in 1971. We were taking a class together, a summer school class, Indians of the Southwest. We would meet out in the hallway. Everybody would go out in the hallway for the break because it was a summer school class, so it was a really long class. And relationships started there. But anyway, yeah, we met in that class, and the rest is history. We've been married for 50 years.
How'd y'all end up in Alaska?
It was my husband's dream.
He'd always wanted to be in Alaska.
Pretty much, yeah. He wanted to be in Alaska. And I kind of fought the dream. In fact, I went home to Alabama, actually applied for jobs, and I was offered a job in Atlanta with, I was offered jobs. And then, I don't know, I guess I just decided, we were going to do this. So. And
you guys started in rural Alaska, correct?
Yes, we lived out in Antioch, which is on the Kuskokwim River.
And you were a teacher?
I was a teacher briefly in Antioch. Because it turned out I was pregnant.
Oh.
When we went out there. That was 1979. And I always had a dream of, if I was going to have a child, I was going to be a stay-at-home mom for at least the first year. So that's what I did. So it was in the 90s that I went back to work.
Oh, okay.
For the Kuskokwim School District.
Gotcha. So you were in rural Alaska for a long time.
Right, 16 years.
Okay. And you had all three of your children there.
I did. I actually had one in Antioch, the first one.
Wow.
And then two of them in the Native Hospital in Bethel.
When did you become a libertarian?
That was kind of a long process. My husband was always interested. He'd actually worked for Goldwater back in the 60s. He was just a teenager back then, so he couldn't vote. but he really admired Goldwater when Goldwater ran for president, and Goldwater was kind of vilified by the by Johnson, who was opposing him. And one of the things that he said that's so true today is that if the Republican Party ever allows the Christian right to take hold in the party, then that will be the end of the Republican Party. They will take it, and they will take it over, and they will become the dictators.
Can you tell us, I guess, what was attractive about the Libertarian Party to...
Well, I'm a huge feminist.
Okay.
And I always believed in, equality for everybody. And it was just, the Libertarian Party epitomized that concept much better than any of the other parties.
And for our listeners who maybe don't know, can you define what a libertarian is?
No, I can't. Yeah, I always say, well, we're about half Democrat and half Republican, but the most important thing is they call it the cult of the individual. Mm-hmm. We don't believe in group rights. We believe that each individual has the same rights as everybody else, just because that person was born and is an individual. It's a great dividing line, actually. An individual has rights. So you can say, well, you guys are discriminating against this group. Let's just make it the purple people group. Okay, this group is getting discriminated against. So we're going to make laws to make purple people have an advantage in job searches right now because they're being discriminated against because they're purple people. Okay, so that's a group rule. Mm-hmm. But as an individual, each purple person needs to be evaluated and looked at as an individual. What is the resume of that purple person? What is the background of that purple person? What is the experience of that purple person? And why would you discriminate against this purple person? Because they have human rights. They are the same as everybody else as far as human rights. Mm-hmm. So that's the main principle is that individuals have rights.
Right. Well, what I heard you say was that you were arguing that the other side would say, well, let's give the purple people special privilege to, be hired or something like that.
Mm-hmm,
give them something special. Mm-hmm. But I guess what I would ask is, let's say that you had a law in place, and first I'll ask if you think the law would be appropriate, a law that would say that you cannot discriminate against purple people. I mean, would that be a special law?
I think it would be, if it only applied to purple people, it would be a special.
What is you can't discriminate
if you had a grip,
you can't discriminate based on color.
That's right, and that is a law.
Okay, well, what if you say you, for example, had a company with 300 people, and you lived in a city that, I'm just throwing out numbers, that was, 30% purple people, but your business was 5% purple people. What it would appear is that your
hiring practices were to discriminate against purple people.
That although you would say that you're not discriminating, it would appear that there's some discrimination happening.
Yes.
And I get where you're coming from with the question about the education, the job history. But if you were in an environment, a location where there was historically hundreds of years of discrimination against purple people, maybe their history of not being hired is related to that history. Maybe their work history won't reflect that non-discrimination pattern because they historically weren't able to get the jobs.
Well, let me put it another way, okay? So the law passes that you have to be hire a certain percentage of people based on the location of
right to
business,
reflect the population.
To reflect the population. Do you go and fire the rest of your staff in order to hire those people, or do you just make an effort to interview people that are of the purple persuasion?
Well, let's say we do B. Are you okay with B? with option B of just making an effort to have your business more accurately reflect the population?
I think a good faith effort
Okay.
is certainly it is, and I would say, yeah, if you have two candidates then that are equally qualified, same amount of experience or experience that would be relevant experience, and the same degree and the same everything the same, and you're saying to yourself, well, 30% of the town is purple people. That should give that purple person a little bit of an advantage.
Right. So you gave me a copy of the 2020,
The 2022?
The 2022 platform for the Alaska Libertarian Party.
Right.
And you were the chair of the committee.
Yes, I was.
I read the platform, and I wanted to just talk through some of it.
You're probably going to start with this one.
Well, because it's at the top of the list.
And that's brand new.
Right.
Of course it is.
So freedom from mandates is the top of the list.
That's exactly right.
We hold that an individual's right of choice is absolute, and no real or imagined emergency, whether medical, environmental, military, or other, is used as a pretext for infringing on individual freedoms. And so I assume that this is a freedom from a mask mandate, that no one should have to wear a mask.
I think even more importantly, freedom from the vaccine mandate.
Where was the vaccine mandate? What government instituted the vaccine mandate?
Well, that's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that one before. It did come down from the federal. I don't believe as a state that we required it at a state level.
We never required it at a state level.
But individual organizations required it. So like you go with the legislature down in Juneau, they required masks and vaccines for the legislators. And they voted on that themselves. Okay, you know what? That's a group. But it is a government group. So it's questionable to me whether they really should have been able to do that. All right? If an individual store owner says, I want everybody that works in my store to have a vaccine, and I want everybody that works in my store to wear a mask, I have anybody that walks in my store to wear a mask, the individual property owner has the right to do that. Well, did the city have the right to do that?
I mean, I would guess that you would say the city did not have the right to do that.
Exactly. That is exactly what I would say.
Well, I know the military has vaccine mandates, not just about COVID.
I know.
About many, many vaccines. Prior to deployment, if you're deploying to certain parts of the world, you have to get a lot of vaccines that we don't require here.
Right. I still have a smallpox vaccination scar from way back in the 60s when I had to get a smallpox vaccine to travel.
Right. And so our schools have, and it varies from state to state how strict they are about their vaccine mandates for children. Do you support every parent being able to make that decision, and that they want their children to remain completely unvaccinated? Well,
we're going to talk about school choice.
Okay. Yeah, we will talk about school choice.
And that is also a choice. I think that when you say everybody needs to have this vaccine to attend our school, and our school is mandatory and you have to attend our school, that's when it becomes a problem. If you say you don't have to attend our school, you can use some alternative form of education for your child, but then it's not a problem anymore.
You can send your kid to private school. I mean, you can
and the private schools may not be mandating all the vaccines, or they may.
Right.
But they're private schools.
And you'd have to pay to go to private school. You don't have to.
We'll talk about that too when we talk about school choice.
There's a lot here. Crime and justice. Would
you like that one?
Yes. Well,
the national platform legalizes sex work.
Okay. Well, so I'm going to read it for our listeners. Government, if it must exist, is to protect the rights of every individual, including life, liberty, and property. So I want to stop there. So that little clause, if it must exist.
Okay. We also put liberty in front of life.
Okay. But I'm just saying.
And everything we changed in 2022, we put liberty in front of life. Why do you think we did that?
Well, tell me why.
Because it's the cult of the individual.
Okay.
You cannot have life before you have liberty.
Well, in this, I want to go back earlier in the sentence, and because there is an implication here that anarchy might be something.
We have a lot of anarchists in the Libertarian Party.
Okay, but that's not you.
Not me, no.
Okay, so you believe,
but my husband is.
you believe there's a place for government.
I believe there's a place for government, and I believe that this is the place is to protect the rights of every individual. That is the place for government.
Okay, so like a police force, criminal justice system. Yeah, so that's kind of the extent of government, as like protect property and people's rights.
Exactly, property, people's life. You know, being assaulted. Alaska has one of the worst. Has probably it's the worst in the nation for violence against women. That is the proper place of government, is to protect our rights and protect our bodies and protect our property.
I'll finish reading this particular part of the podcast. We advocate the repeal of laws that result in victimless crimes. And so what sprung out to me that is like legalizing sex work. That's what jumped into my head.
Exactly.
For, we advocate the repeal of laws that result in victimless crimes. So we would want to legalize prostitution. Yes.
And then prostitutes will be protected too.
Correct.
That was one of the funny things that happened during I think it was the Obama administration, when they sent all those Secret Service agents down to Bolivia. I can't remember now. It was a South American country. And under their constitution or under their laws, the prostitutes got legal protection. So if one of our Secret Service guys walked out without paying, she could go to the police and say, this guy did not pay me. Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
I would just say that this is an interesting part of the platform because we have some fairly religious politicians who have referred to themselves as libertarians, who I think I would be surprised if they supported legalizing prostitution.
Yeah, you probably would be.
I mean,
I would be surprised if they didn't use prostitution. Yeah, it's one of those weird ass things, excuse my French.
I'll go to the next one, self-defense. We support the right of the individual to self-defense and to keep and bear arms and accessories without regard to function or capacity. So no restriction on what type of weapon you have, how many bullets it shoots, what kind of bullets it shoots, any restriction there. And I'll just throw in, I know that in 1980, when David Koch was running for vice president, and that libertarian platform, there's actually something about not restricting tear gas use. Like basically that you could have just really, it was a free-for-all for what kind of weapons you could have. And I'll continue reading that the only legitimate use of force is in defense of individual rights, liberty, life, and justly acquired property, and
self-defense.
So I wonder, are you guys opposed?
So if you go and shoot up a school, that's not self-defense.
Correct.
You go to
but
a
you
mall.
can have any type of weapon. And I guess there are certain laws that are being proposed in certain states, not here, but in certain states, about the safe storage of weapons, particularly with children in the home, and that in some places there have been laws that have been brought forward to make it the parent be prosecuted if their weapons were stored improperly and the improper storage of their weapons resulted in the death or injury of a child. And I mean, I guess, you guys would be opposed to that type of legislation because that would be infringing upon an individual's rights to decide how their weapons should be stored or placed, or...
I don't even want to go there.
Okay.
As a mother, as a grandmother, I don't really want to go to that place right now and talk about that. I feel that is not infringing on your rights so much as saying, one of our other tenets is that you need to be responsible. You need to be personally responsible for every act that you do, everything you do.
So what I'm hearing is the person would be held liable. You're not opposed to that person being held liable, but that it's the individual's responsibility to keep their guns out of their children's hand. It's not the state's responsibility to legislate that you must keep your guns safe. the individual has to decide that for themselves.
That would be, the ideal thing. And that's what it is in Alaska, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from you, Clift, is that you don't religiously adhere to the libertarian principles, which I respect. I respect that in anybody.
I don't even religiously adhere to my religion. So,
Right, but I guess what I think with certain people that you interview about their political philosophy, where they maybe wrote the platform, they would take things to their logical extreme. But it sounds like that you appreciate the philosophy and are in the spirit of the philosophy without going to the extreme.
Right, and I absolutely reject the platform of the Republican Party, and I absolutely reject the platform of the Democratic Party because I think it goes too far.
Well, can you give us a specific example of the Republican Party platform that you object to and a specific example?
Well, let's talk about immigration.
Okay.
I am the daughter of an immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
Where
did your family immigrate from?
Nazi Germany. And so I have very, very strong feelings about let people in. Mm. Let them in. Mm. Let them stay. Help them. This is the land of the free. Right? These are the golden shores, right? So I have very strong feelings about that. And that is one part of the Republican platform that makes me want to barf. Because I know what happened to my family. I never got to meet my uncle or my grandfather. They died in Auschwitz. So I have very, very strong feelings about immigration.
What about the Democratic platform?
So the Democratic platform is okay on that.
I guess what I was asking, I wanted to know what you disagreed with in the Democratic platform. Like an example of something specifically that you disagree with in the Democratic Party platform.
Well, there's not a whole lot, again, like 50% of the platform I'm perfectly fine with. Some of the stuff about the green energy, I think, is counterproductive.
Let's talk about the energy and resources. While energy is needed to fuel a modern society, governments should not be subsidizing or obstructing any particular form of energy. A free market, unhindered by regulation, will provide the opportunity for cheap and abundant energy to all.
And this one was debated quite a bit even in convention.
Okay. Well,
so, but what we're getting at here. First of all, let's talk about Alaska.
Right.
Yeah, that's basically what we're getting at is, we have a few environmental restrictions on our oil companies and all our mining companies. Mm-hmm. But we can still do it better than anyone else in the world.
Well, I think you and I have had this conversation before, that you believe you can't have any special taxes on oil companies. Mm-hmm. The libertarian philosophy... Well, the libertarian philosophy...
No, this is actually my personal...
Well, there actually is something...
But we are against taxes in general.
You're against taxes in general, but there was something in your platform about not taxing one particular industry differently than the other. If you were going to have a tax, it needed to be fair.
That's probably my words.
Oh.
Because I was the platform chair. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's what I feel, is that if we're going to have a tax... It should be fair. It should not be, you're the oil companies. And here's the thing. We are business partners. The state of Alaska, through ANILCA and everything else, the state of Alaska is a business partner with the oil companies. We are selling them our raw product.
Right. And what I think some people would make an argument, including, for example, Senator Bill Wielechowski, that we're not charging enough for that product.
And I would say that too.
Okay.
I would say that too, because
it sounds like it might be a semantics issue. It's not about a special tax, but maybe our price.
No, the tax issue comes in because of our Constitution and because the taxes go directly to support larger government. Taxes go directly into the general fund to be spent however the legislators want to spend them. Royalties go into the permanent fund, but they only go into the permanent fund 25%. The other 75% goes into the general fund. So by saying taxes instead of royalties, you're saying, well, we don't want the permanent fund to get that money.
Well, I want the permanent fund to get that money.
Well, then you're with me.
But I guess where I'm not with you is I do think that the oil companies should be treated differently. Oh, because, I mean, again, I guess I still feel like it's coming down to a little bit of a semantic issue. I guess, so then what you would say is, to correct my language, I should say that I want more royalties from the product that we are selling to the oil companies.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I can use that
let's
language.
let's look at Texas, where private owners own the land where the oil is drilled.
Right, I know. It's
And you're
we
from
have it better.
Texas.
I am from Texas.
And maybe that model is the one that we should be looking at.
Oh no!
Oh, wait a minute! But those property owners do not get to tax the oil company.
Those property owners are multimillionaires/billionaires.
Well, sure, but they don't tax the oil company.
And I mean, essentially, so many things in our culture, John D. Rockefeller, the initial oil barons, if we had an if the Alaska model was the country model, things would look differently in our country today, for sure.
Well, yes. I mean, our model is basically the same model as, I don't know, Venezuela or
Norway.
Because it's a state-owned resource. That's what it is. It's a state-owned resource.
And so you think the Texas model is better?
I think that when you're talking about business and you're talking about government, there's two different things going on here. We are in the business of selling oil to the oil companies.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just sell the oil.
We skipped over property and contract and environment. So,
Yeah.
Property rights are entitled to the same protection as all other human rights.
Mhm.
The owners of property have the right to control, use, dispose of, or in any manner enjoy their property, so long as it is not the harm of others.
Yeah,
So
we
it's
had
not
some
the
trouble
harm-
with the grammar there.
Well, it's not the harm of others. I mean, the thing I worry about is pollution.
Yes, pollution harms others.
Right.
So if you're polluting, you are violating this.
I mean, I guess I just feel like that with regard to water, air, the protecting our air and water, I feel could go beyond local.
It could go beyond local. But going back to this,
Right.
harming others.
Okay.
If you're pumping the river full of polluting water,
Mm-hmm.
fecal matter or whatever you're throwing in there, chemicals,
Right.
you are going to harm others. You're going to harm the fish. You're going to harm the people that drink
Correct.
that water.
But I guess what I would say is like the keeping it at the local level. What I feel like that's saying is that some local communities might not mind fecal matter in their water, and therefore we shouldn't make that decision for them. The EPA should not be involved. The federal government shouldn't be involved because some local communities...
Let's turn it around. What about that town in Mississippi right now?
Right, that has no drinking water.
Yes. Has the EPA been of any help at all?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be
once government gets
honest.
involved,
I'm not an expert, but I would just say that if a local community there were to say that this is not a problem for our local community,
yeah,
that's not
but they're
okay.
not saying that.
no,
are
they're
they?
not. They're not. As they shouldn't.
And they should have, and it should have been addressed long ago.
So you're saying
I
that
think it's a local problem.
right?
It is a local problem, and the EPA. Somebody got bought off. Somebody took kickbacks.
I would just say that the EPA has had its teeth removed over the past, 6 to 7 years for sure. Through the entire Trump administration, just the absolute, decomposition of the EPA, and then we have the recent Supreme Court decision saying that limiting their powers. So I feel like at this particular juncture, it would be difficult to, it's difficult to take the power away from the EPA and then blame them when there's an environmental problem shortly thereafter. Obviously, we were coming from two different vantage points, but I will, to just go back, to be clear, when we talked, I mentioned the 1980 platform of when David Koch ran as VP, they wanted complete abolition of the FDA, the Department of Energy, the EPA, a nuclear committee, I can't even read my own handwriting, the FAA, Bureau of Land Management, the FEC, the Bureau of Tobacco, Alcohol, and Firearms. They wanted those all abolished and a repeal of all forms of taxation. I mean, that's a pretty intense platform.
It is. All I can say is I wasn't voting Libertarian in that day.
Okay, so you feel like you guys have tempered your... you've tempered it a little.
Well, this is the Alaska platform too.
Right.
So it can't be everything to everybody.
Okay.
And I think the national platform may have some of those alphabet places.
So when you talk about finance and spending for the government, you wrote, all persons are entitled to keep the fruits of their labor. Therefore, we call for the phase out of all forms of involuntary contracts, such as income tax and other payroll deductions. And so I just wrote, well, how do you support the government?
Well, we would say voluntary contributions would be...
Like donate what you feel the government is worth?
Probably.
How much would you donate?
And then this is awesome. Yeah, what I think it's worth.
I told you before we started that I listened to some clips of Ron Paul speaking. Ron Paul, who's the father of Rand Paul. They're different people.
Yes.
And he was talking about that the first place he would cut is the first place that he would cut is the Department of Education, because he felt the Department of Education wasn't actually educating.
Okay,
anybody.
federally speaking, the Department of Education does nothing but hinder.
Right.
I mean, they get in the way of local decisions, and they are full of what we call unfunded mandates. It used to be a word we used a lot in the education industry. I was a special education teacher. Talk about unfunded mandates. I mean, you're hiring extra teachers, full-time teachers, to work with kids that already have teachers, and you're saying, and the federal government's not really giving any money for that. There's this tiny little bit of money. They're mandating
extra teachers,
all
but
this
not paying for
paperwork,
extra teachers.
right? But they're not paying for the extra teachers, and all this paperwork that you have to fill out for them. And my husband was an administrator, and he says it's insane. He says you spend all this time filling out this paperwork, and you get this tiny little bit of money that goes with that from the federal government, and you get all these mandates. So you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. When some of our Bush schools, the mandates take over the whole school.
What you wrote, what the platform states for education is education, like any other service, is best provided by the free market, achieving greater quality and efficiency with more diversity of choice.
Now, some of the conservative people that we had on the board at that time argued with me a lot. And they thought I was, an enemy because I'd worked for public education. But I say Alaska has the best school choice of any of the United States. And I will stand by that. We have the best school choice. Almost every school district has a homeschool program where you can subscribe to, quote, correspondence school, like we used to call it. And some have several. Almost every school district has charter schools like we do in Anchorage. We have an abundance of alternative schools. We have an abundance of charter schools. And also we do have, private school choice. And nobody is mandated to attend their neighborhood school. This is something that we find in the other states, that people are mandated. Their kids have to attend the neighborhood school. We have the best school choice for the least amount of money from us, from the people, of any of the lower 48 states or Hawaii. We have the best. And it's because we have so many choices.
So I guess by having this in your platform, you want to maintain the system as it is.
No, not exactly.
Okay.
But we have an excellent system.
Okay, well, what would
Right
be the
now.
change that...
Well, I think that people that are back in the day, and I don't remember which campaign I was on, my husband is from Arkansas, and they have something called the Arkansas Scholarship Program or whatever, but it applies to special education students. And if your student is not making it in the regular school and you feel like your student needs some special help and you're not getting it in the regular school building, these private schools were able to apply for, I don't know, certification, let's say, to be a provider of special education services, and they had to have somebody on staff who was certified in special education services, just one teacher on staff that was certified and who could kind of sort of write the IEPs, the individual education plans, and supervise the program there at that school. And they were giving scholarships. And the only thing is you did have to first enroll in your neighborhood school, and then if you couldn't make it, or in the public school, and if you couldn't, the kid was failing in the public school, then he and his siblings could go to a private school and they could get these scholarships. I thought that was a terrific plan. I don't see anything wrong with that. And I don't think anybody would object to that. I think it's a great plan because people do need choices. One of the things they're always saying is, the private school students do better on the tests and this and that. Well, as a special ed teacher, I did have the opportunity to work with some private school students because they qualified for special ed. And I was providing services or even supervising services for these students. And they had to enroll part-time in the public school. So it was like 25% enrollment or something like that. And they might come over for, half an hour a week, and I'd work with them and supervise the rest of their plan or whatever, work with their teachers. Probably it's still going on. I don't know, because I've been out of it for a while.
Well, we had a podcast guest who, her mother sacrificed to send her and her siblings to a private school. And then ultimately, two of her brothers moved to public school, and when they got to public school, they were identified with learning disabilities and put in a special ed program. However, that mother had been sacrificing to send them to private school for those, 5 or however many years.
Right.
And they were not identified because what that family's suspicion was because they didn't have the resources and they wanted to keep getting the money, so they did not identify them.
So what am I saying? I'm saying we should be helping those parents.
Well, I guess what I would say is in this case, those two brothers were much better served by the public school system than by the private school system.
Well, I would probably tell that mother to go back and sue because that's ridiculous. I actually did have students in the public school where I worked that had been homeschooled, and the mother recognized that her kids were not making it. This kid was not making it, and they brought him over to my public school and enrolled him in there, and they did qualify. And 2 years later, they were out because they had made it, and I realized that I'm probably prejudiced because I was so successful with kids, but I think that there are workarounds, and those kids should have been identified, and that's too bad. Go ahead.
I want to talk about one last issue before we kind of.
I think that if we wanted to help the private school parents with their finances, we could have a pass-through. Well, we could have a pass-through through the local school district where they could get partial scholarships to go to the private schools. I don't think it should be a full.
It's an interesting. I feel like it's a little bit of a contradiction because I think we were talking earlier about how the downfall of the Republican Party is the, as you quoted Barry Goldwater saying, if the Christian fundamentalists or the super religious took over, that would be the downfall of the Republican Party, and that's what we're seeing. And I think the fear that many have about taxpayers funding private schools is they would be funding religious indoctrination. And so,
But that's part of what you say, is that when you do this, is that you say, this has to go to reading, writing, math.
Well, but then I feel like you have to have some sort of oversight. And then that's when I start to institute more government, which you would oppose.
No, I would not, because if they're asking for help from the local government to pay for their private school tuition, then they need to be saying, oh, okay, but we'll take the same tests that the public school students take. And by taking those same tests that the public school students take, then they will be assured that their kids are doing better in the private school. If they're taking the same tests that the public school kids are taking and their kids are not doing well in the private school, they should have that information too.
I want to close up. I want to talk a little bit just in general about the libertarian movement. We mentioned it before we started recording that I kind of saw there's sort of like an economic libertarianism,
yes,
sort of a legal, judicial libertarianism, and a cultural libertarianism. And we agreed that culturally speaking, that the libertarian values really do line up with more democratic.
For some people. And I think that we're having a little a big split here right now. It's like, and in fact, the national organization. I was very upset at the national convention myself. They took some things out of the national platform, which I think are essential.
Well,
but I would like to say yes. But I like to tell everybody, libertarians are pro-choice on everything. We have been pro-choice on everything since the late 1970s, since Roe versus Wade, as a matter of fact. We have been pro-choice on everything. Before Roe versus Wade, there was some, there was a 100-day thing on the abortion issue, where they thought early abortions were okay, but late abortions were not okay. And then there was Roe versus Wade, and the whole party decided we were going to be 100% pro-choice on everything.
Well,
and I think this had to do with the times, of course, and it had to do with those people who wanted to have some limitations. And again, going back to taxpayer-funded healthcare, a lot of these medical procedures are between you and your doctor. There are privacy issues.
I mean, it's awkward because ideally you wouldn't have taxes. So if you didn't have taxes, you wouldn't have taxpayer-funded healthcare.
But if it must exist, and it does, Medicare should not be discriminating against people for morality-based decisions.
So speaking of reading, do you have any books that you would recommend to our listeners who might want to learn more about these issues?
I don't have any right now. One of my favorite books, if you haven't read it, is Freakonomics.
It's a really good book.
It's a very, very good book, and it's such an eye-opener. And I think it applies across all parties and all levels. It's just a huge eye-opener. But the basic premise of that book really is that government interferes, and the outcome is not what you expect very often, the unintended consequences. And I think that's a really good book. And I do sometimes listen to the Freakonomic podcast. I do read Reason Magazine, which I think is very balanced. It is libertarian. It is financed by the Koch brothers, but there was a huge rift in the party back in the 1980s. We almost talked about that. And so it's not conservative like you would think it would be. The editor is female, and they present both sides of every issue. And I think that this is what's missing right now in our political life. We are not getting a chance to hear that essay, that debate, both sides of every issue, so that people can make their own minds up about what's going on. And the best thing about libertarianism, and the root word of libertarianism is liberty, is freedom. That is the root word. And I think everybody in their hearts wants to live in the land of the free, not in the land of the, overpowering government that's going to take over your whole life and tell you who you have to be.
Well, Clift, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Well, I have had a great time, Get me talking and I just talk away.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable. Please check out his website, anchoragelife.net, and his YouTube channel by the same name about life in Anchorage. Thank you to you, our listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. In a few weeks, we are discussing A Land Gone Lonesome by Fairbanks-based author Dan O'Neill. It is about the Yukon River and the people who live on it. You have time to read it before the episode.